Good evening, everybody. What a beautiful night. Hasn't rained yet in Greenwald Tent. I'm Nick Burns. I'm co-chair of the Aspen Security Forum and the Aspen Strategy Group, along with my very good friend Condoleezza Rice, who's going to join us in a couple of days. It is a great pleasure to see this crowd. We have ministers here from many of our allied governments. We have ambassadors here. I just walked in with the ambassadors of the Netherlands and the ambassador of Belgium, both NATO allies. We have people from all around the world. In each continent in the world, we have participants. We have you for the next 3 days, so welcome. The first person I want to recognize tonight is the board chair of the Aspen Institute, Margot Pritzker, and she has done a phenomenal job of lifting this organization up. Thank you, Margot. The second person I want to recognize is the guy sitting beside her, who is a valued member of the Aspen Strategy Group, close personal friend, Tom Pritzker. Dan Porterfield couldn't be with us. He's got a very important and positive family event he's had to go to outside this country, but had a great talk with Dan this morning about all the great positive changes here at the Aspen Institute, the support from the board, the support from the public for this big idea that we have that it's worthwhile getting together to talk about serious issues concerning the United States and the world. So thank you all for being here. We're going to have an important discussion, set of discussions. I think they're going to be exciting, maybe even portentous over the next 3 days. We're going to have some debates, as we always do at the Aspen Strategy Group, because we're living in a consequential time. And we've got major crises affecting all parts of the world and some major positive transformations of the global economy and in technology that we ought to be thinking about seriously and talking about seriously. Consider just briefly some of the major points of the agenda this week. Putin's brutal, illegal, and tragic war in Ukraine, his assault on a great nation in the center of Europe, the nation of Ukraine. The war's impact on hundreds of thousands of civilians, innocent civilians, who've died or been wounded or been scarred forever by this brutal assault. And a nation fighting for its very existence, Ukraine, in Europe's most horrific war since World War II. There's a lot at stake, and we'll hear about that tonight in the second panel. Consider the Middle East. Israel is in its strongest position since May 14, 1948, since the day that Israel was born. Iran, on the other hand, is in its weakest strategic position since the Iranian Revolution of 1978 and 1979. Consider the impact these turbulent series of events of the last few years have had on Yemen and on poor Lebanon, which is searching for true stability and independence, on the people of Syria. Consider the impact on the people of Gaza and the desperate situation that the people in Gaza are suffering right now. A lot to talk about in the Middle East. And consider the U.S.-China relationship. We'll be discussing it in just a few minutes. It's competitive. It's very challenging. It's critical to both of our countries. It's critical to the world, given the impact of China and the United States on the world. And it's really complicated. That was my life for the last 4 years. I actually came to Aspen 3 times a year for 13 years when I was involved with the Strategy Group and Security Forum. I haven't been here since 2019. It is great to be back talking about these ideas. It's not all just gloom and doom. We have in front of us the age of innovation. And a lot of the people here from the private sector, from our research universities in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the United States of America, and Canada, our great neighbor to the north, are engaged in AI, artificial intelligence, in biotechnology, in quantum, in a way that can drive human ingenuity, human progress forward positively if we do it right, or lead us to peril if we we don't get it right. And so we'll have a lot of talk about that along with space and cyber in the next few years. But let me finish with a sad thought. We're here tonight because the person who stood at this podium and opened last year's session of the Aspen Security Forum was the great and unforgettable Joe Nye, and we lost Joe a couple of months ago. At another time of division in American society, 41 years ago, Joe Nye, Brent Scowcroft, and Bill Perry came together, and they had a big idea that when Republicans and Democrats were arguing and fighting in Washington, they might repair to the Rocky Mountains for serious discussion about the issues that separated them. Then it was President Reagan's defense buildup and the missile issues that we had with Europe. That was a big idea. Joe, of those three people, was the person who was with this organization all the way through until May of this year, when he passed away in Massachusetts. And his core belief was that we had to be nonpartisan in this tent and in every other Aspen forum, that we didn't come in as Republicans and Democrats. We came in as Americans, and we were fair to each other and respectful, and that is the way we're going to conduct our conversations this week. I will say this, we regret, obviously, the decision of the Pentagon and the Trump administration to not permit 12 senior officials of the Pentagon who had accepted and wanted to be here from being here. It's regretful, but our door is open to the Trump administration, of course to our government, because our government was duly elected. We want them to succeed. Our door is open this summer, next year, and every year, because that's the American way. Thank you very much. One more thing. The person who has really lifted up the Aspen Strategy Group, who has expanded our membership, expanded the way we think about our job, is Anya Manuel. She's done a terrific job as our executive director, and along with Neve King and Leah Batunis and our incredible staff, they've done so much to put this work together. So please welcome Anya Manuel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to these glorious mountains. It's so nice to be back in the trenches with you, Nick Burns. Nick was my first boss and mentor, my first time working in the U.S. government. We've done so many things since, and we're grateful to have you back from Beijing. We're grateful for all of the great work you did on behalf of your country across many, many presidential administrations, and last as our ambassador to China. So thank you for being our co-chair. Thank you. I'm actually going to start with the thank yous and then do kind of a more reflective piece. We are just so grateful to all of you. Every year you brave bad weather, flights that get canceled, people getting rerouted through LA and Idaho and who knows where, and you make it here because this is such an important conversation that we all have together. Our sponsors are wonderful, they're steadfast, they teach us about technology, they teach us about what's happening in the business world, so we're grateful to have all of you with us. And most of all, Nick already said it, but this unbelievable team that can turn on a dime, we have so much fun together, even when it's midnight and we're all still working our laptops. So I know you always all get embarrassed, but if you could at least wave if you don't want to stand up. I'd like to acknowledge Neve King, our fearless leader, Leah Batunis, Deb, Alana, Karina, Maggie, Emily, Matilda, Elizabeth, Ellen, Ella, and Chris Herman. Thank you. And you will also see here with us our 5th class of Rising Leaders. This is a program we started in the middle of COVID, wisely, because we thought there aren't enough young people. We need to get the new generation of nonpartisan or bipartisan and thoughtful foreign policy leaders here to the Security Forum, and we're going to spend a whole year teaching them a little bit about leadership, and we hope what we're doing with all of you is the most important thing, which is that you will be lifelong friends and colleagues and all help each other. So we're grateful that you're all here. Thank you. Let me now just pick up briefly where Nick left off. Nick understandably talked about all of the complexities that our world is currently facing. I think those of us who are professionals in the foreign policy world, I think we've rarely seen a world this complex. But what brings us here over and over again is a deeply human desire that unites us all. A shared desire to reduce conflict, to increase stability, and to create a more peaceful and a more prosperous world. So maybe that sounds naive in this very complicated world, but that's why we all come here. That's why all of these people here go to work every day. That's why we have some of the world's best journalists. And this aspiration spans all sorts of political lines. President Trump recently said that his preference will always be for peace and partnership whenever those outcomes can be achieved, always. And President Biden told the United Nations last fall that our goal must be to end the conflicts that are raging today and ensure that the forces that are holding us together are much more powerful than those pulling us apart. So there's a lot of hope. Hope alone isn't enough. And the tools that we used to rely on to do this, alliances, institutions, they don't function quite as we did. So our theme for these 3 days together is going to be to question our own long-held assumptions. A lot of experts in this field, and we get a little bit stuck in our thinking. But I would posit to all of you that our assumptions don't hold the way we may have thought they did. We assume that economic interdependence would naturally reduce conflict. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. We assume that technology will always serve humanity. We're seeing a lot about AI this week, and that may not always be the case. We assume that institutions built for a different era would remain fit for today. We may have to reinvent some of those. So that is our task here in Aspen. To help us do that, we have brought together an unbelievable juggernaut of 100 speakers and moderators, hailing from 17 countries, senior officials, Republican and Democrat from the United States, civilian and military, senators, experts, leading voices in technology, in business, and in journalism. And together, I'm going to close with Joe, just as you did, Nick. We're going to follow the spirit of our founder, Joe Nye. Joe always knew to retreat to nature. And he always said to us, the reason we go out in nature, we all come here, we all go to the mountains, is to renew our thinking, to seek fresh ideas amongst thoughtful, principled people. Thank you all for being here. Let's get started. So it's now my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage Nick Burns, recently returned from Beijing with real insight into what's happening in China today, and one of the world's great journalists, Zanny Minton-Bedoues, the editor-in-chief of The Economist, for a conversation about China. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Good to see you, Nick. Thank you, Anya. I'm delighted to be here. Again, I have to confess, I've had the pleasure of 2 Aspen trips within 1 month this year. I came to the Ideas Festival and now here. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to have this conversation with you, Nick. It seems, I think, apposite that we start this gathering with a conversation about US-China relations, because it is really the single most important geopolitical question of our time. How those relations evolve, how the US deals with an increasingly formidable, authoritarian, occasionally aggressive competitor, rival, potential adversary, will shape the world of the 21st century. It will shape the world the rest of us live in. And I think it's increasingly shaping the US. It's important, I think, to remember the impact that concerns about China, changing policies towards China have had on the US in the last 10 years. There's actually a remarkable, I think, bipartisan consensus in a country that is incredibly polarized. The one thing you can find pretty much everyone agreeing on in Washington is that you need to be tough on China. Now, there's differences between the two sides on tactics, but I would submit that there is a pretty general view that this is the most important thing for the US to get right. And from the outside, and take this as the observations of someone from the rest of the world whose life and world is going to be shaped by this, I think it is possible that the US doesn't even, given all of that, realize the scale of the import of getting this relationship right. We are, as we'll have already heard from Anya and we'll hear again, we're in the foothills of the AI revolution. So we have this geopolitical rivalry at a moment of tremendous technological change. So how this rivalry pans out will shape the economy of the 21st century. It may determine who has an unassailable lead. It will, heaven forbid, we can avoid this, but it could lead to the most catastrophic conflict if we get this wrong. And finally, I think there is a risk that in its approach to China, the US risks potentially losing sight of what it is that makes the US great. There is, and I'm going to, hopefully I can rile you a little bit, this is why I'm saying this, there is a risk that in its concerns about China, the US loses sight of the openness, the competitive market, the attraction to immigrants, the kinds of policies that make the US great. And I think it would be catastrophic for the world if in a focused rivalry with China, the US loses what is great about the US. So there you go. There you've got my views to start with. I want to start. We couldn't have a better person to talk about this with than Nick Burns. You all know him, so I'm not going to give you the many reasons why you're the ideal person, but simply to say, every year I go to China, as you know. Every year around March, I spend about a week there with my colleagues. And almost always the most interesting, or at least one of the most interesting conversations is with Nick. We sat at a table in the embassy. You made clear at the beginning this was off the record, and then you held forth. I hope you will get at least some of that candor this time. And I want to start by asking you...
I'm out of government.
Exactly, you're out of government. You're now at the Kennedy School, my old alma mater, and therefore you have to grade papers. I assume you're teaching classes.
It's the AI world, so we don't always do papers anymore.
Okay, well, but you grade. So I want to start by you assigning a grade to US policy towards China over the last, let's say, decade, to make it bipartisan. How well has the US done? Where is it done well? Where is it done not well?
Okay, in 2 minutes or less, because we got a lot of issues to go through. Welcome, Zenny. Nice to see you. We usually meet in Beijing. I'd say this. I think there is a rough consensus between the two political parties that we have to be very competitive with China. And I thought when I left China just before the inauguration, I thought I probably spent with my team about 80% of our collective time on the competitive edge. It's trying to prevent the PLA from becoming a superior military force to the US Navy and Air Force. It's trying to deal with the technology race, both the commercial aspects of it, AI, quantum, biotech, and the military applications that are being spun out that will have consequences for the global balance of power. It's trying to deal, as Janet Yellen and I both did 6 days with Vice Premier He Feng about 15 months ago, with this extraordinary Chinese push of low-priced, below the cost of production exports dumping to the rest of the world. And Joe Biden put 100% tariffs, remember, on Chinese EVs, and trying to engage in the battle of ideas. I think there's a self-confidence in China, in the leadership, that their big idea, an authoritarian state, controlled by one person at the top, with this resolute Communist Party, that delivers services and high-speed trains, is a better, they say, a better system than ours, and we contested that. So that was the battlefront on the competitive edge. But just 2 quick points. We also tried to work with China and the Biden administration because we believe that China and the US have to help lead with the EU and Japan on that issue in the Paris Accords. We tried to work on fentanyl. President Trump has followed to do that. So it's not just a competitive relationship, it's largely, but there is a competitive, cooperative edge to it. I hesitate to give a grade except to say...
It's your new job, you have to.
I think the American consensus, the rough consensus, is correct. That China is seeking to become the strongest country in the Indo-Pacific, that if you think about the map, we should have brought the map. The PLA is pushing out in the Spratlys and Paracels in the South China Sea, in the Senkakus in the East China Sea, certainly in the Taiwan Strait, and the Yellow Sea opposite South Korea, and on a 2,500-kilometer front with India and the Himalayas. That is really substantial. And we'll get to this at Aspen this week. If you look at Chris Wray's public statements, our recent FBI director, about the degree to which China has penetrated our own grid here and our networks in the United States, this is a true rival. And so we tried to cooperate, but I think the consensus is live in peace with China, but compete with China.
So you're too much of a diplomat for me to be able to get a grade out of you. But let me put it a slightly different way. Is China a greater threat now than when you arrived in Beijing?
Well, we talked today, and one of the things I told Zanny, and I've said this a couple of times since I left, is I went out like most American officials in both parties with hawkish views. But in the Biden administration, we also wanted to connect with the leadership if we could do that and get some things done. So that was our goal, and to live in peace. I came back more hawkish. And your magazine asked me to write an article in February, which I did, for the great David Rennie. And he said, please write an article on what you learned. What were your takeaways? And that was my prominent takeaway, that I think the problem set is more difficult and complicated. I think the will and ambition and increasing strength of China technologically, economically, through their intelligence apparatus, and certainly through the PLA, it's not just a wake-up call. I think we had the wake-up call 10 years ago, but it certainly reaffirms where most of us are. We've got to be ready. We've got to up our own game.
I think I could summarize that by saying that, yes, it is more of a threat than it was when you went out. I mean, it's worth reading.
Well, I think it is in the cyber dimension, in space, and certainly as the PLA continues to test the limits, we've been pushing back. A year ago this month, the U.S. government pushed back as the Chinese challenged Filipino sovereignty in 3 different atolls in the South China Sea, and China stopped because we reminded the Chinese Article 4 of our treaty with the Philippines is defense, and we were prepared to do that.
So we'll come to defense in a second, but I wanted to try and structure our conversation around 3 elements of this rivalry. One is the economic arena, the second, broadly, the diplomatic arena, and then the third and most alarming, the security and defense one. But just let's start with the economic one. And you're obviously not a member of this administration, but you are observing it from the outside. Can you tell me what U.S. policy is trying to achieve with China on trade?
You know, I think it's actually, as I can understand President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Secretary Bessent, I think they're trying to do in some ways, maybe with a different order of priorities, what we were trying to do in the Biden administration. Here's what we were trying to do. I think both administrations have said we do not want to see a decoupling of the 2 largest economies in the world. $642 billion last year in two-way trade in goods and services, number one. But that we had to restrict certain national security dual-use technologies that we don't want to end up helping the PLA to overtake the U.S. military. I think there's an agreement on that. Third, we also believe that trade was important. Joe Biden put 100% tariffs on EVs, 50% on semiconductors, Chinese, and 25% on lithium batteries. I wouldn't have counseled 145% in April, but I got to tell you, I think President Trump is right to be tough-minded, to push a tough deal. I think Secretary Bessent has been impressive in his discussions with He Feng, the vice premier, who's a very close associate of President Xi and is really the overall coordinator of economic policy. And we've got to drive a hard bargain because, as Secretary Yellen said publicly, China is producing 2 to 3 times domestic demand in steel, robotics, EVs, lithium batteries, solar panels, dumping them on the rest of the world. Who's raised tariffs against China in the last 12 months? India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, the US, Canada, and Europe. So I actually think there are a lot of parallels and connections between President Biden's approach, President Trump's approach, and I wish President Trump success in that.
Well, I think that's true. There is a lot of commonality, but let me give perhaps the opposite view, which is that one could look at the last 3 months and argue that actually the threatening tariff strategy has been somewhat of a failure. Who climbed down on tariffs with China in the end? The US. China is the country that has been playing hardball with its rare earth export controls. And I think there's a plausible argument that actually the last 3 months have shown that China has the upper hand in this economic relationship, and that you can threaten as much as you like. In the end, the US backs down and China's standing tough.
I'm glad you asked about this because I respectfully disagree on 2 points. It's a symbiotic relationship. It really has been building since Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the late 70s, early 80s. We have more than 10,000 American companies in China. We've got multiples of that trading with China from the United States. It's really important to us. It's also important to the Chinese. We're their largest export market. I think one of the reasons why I would predict there's going to be a trade deal. Logic and self-interest will lead both of them towards a deal, and there can't be a summit meeting, I think, Chinese wouldn't have it, without a trade deal. But why is that going to happen? Chinese, it was very clear, I was in China during our election day, and I knew the moment that President Trump won, I began hearing from Chinese officials. They were preparing for a showdown, but we were too. And President Trump and Scott Bessent were prepared. Yes, the Chinese withheld rare earths. We withheld ethane. We withheld critical components in the semiconductor industry. I think it was kind of a standoff. Right now, unfortunately, I see a lot of articles saying there's been an agreement. There's no agreement. There's a truce. But the truce, I think, will lead both sides to climb down eventually, not at 0% tariffs. I can't imagine taking President Biden's 100% tariffs on EVs off, given BYD. So I guess I see it a little different.
But what is this, and you would expect this from me as someone who runs a magazine that fights for free trade, but I'm still trying to understand what the strategic purpose of this deal would be. What would be the definition of success in a deal with the Chinese?
Well, our principal problem in trade with the Chinese has been for the American companies, particularly the manufacturing companies that are in China, and many of them have been there for several decades, the playing field is not level. One of the things I did, I met nearly every CEO who came through China, and I felt that was a good use of my time. Story after story about forced technology transfer, about not applying the international rules concerning intellectual property theft, and that goes on in spades in that country. And I think President Trump has been talking about that and trying to make sure that at the end of any deal, there might be a better way for American companies to be competitive. And what I don't know, and I think what none of us know, is will the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has put down in almost every country in the world, will they be the new baseline in U.S.-China trade? We don't know that yet. But, you know, since President Trump has put a lot of effort into this, and he's also talked more positively about his personal relationship with President Xi, and you'll notice that Secretary Rubio had what he said was a positive and constructive meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi last week in Malaysia. I think we're seeing a creeping path towards some kind of a deal. Don't know the outlines, but that would be the prediction.
That may well be the case, that you have a deal. But if you sort of zoom out a bit and you look at China, and we've had these conversations every time I came to Beijing, to simplify somewhat, 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the two sides were not talking to each other, it really did feel as though we were on the drumbeat towards some kind of conflict. This time, when I was there in March, after the inauguration, before Liberation Day, my sense was from Chinese interlocutors, firstly, I was stunned by the number of Chinese officials who said to me, what is happening in Washington reminds them of the Cultural Revolution. And there were so many of them, and I felt there had to be some kind of a sort of official sanction that they were allowed to say this. But secondly, that they felt the approach and the tariff-based approach was going to, quote, make China great again, because it was going to accelerate China's push towards domestic consumption and China's push into high-end manufacturing. And if you look at the industries of the 21st century, whether it's clean energy, whether it's high-end manufacturing, China is in many ways streets ahead of the US. I mean, you've been there, you've seen it. How much does that worry you? And how much is this tariff policy the appropriate way for the US to retain its economic lead?
Well, let me just talk about the tariff policy towards China. I think that's your question. I think President Trump is right to be tough-minded. I see him heading for a deal with China. Now, on the rest of it, these global reciprocal tariffs, I actually supported what President Obama and his U.S. Trade Rep Mike Froman proposed in 2015-16, and that is a big free trade deal in the Indo-Pacific, and you see the consequences of that. China is the leading trade partner of 120 countries in the world. All of Southeast Asia, all of Central Asia, parts of South Asia, nearly all of sub-Saharan Africa. And as we were flying into Lima, Peru for President Biden's last summit meeting on November 15th of 24, the New York Times had this extraordinary color-coded map. In 2002, the United States was the lead trade partner of every country in South America. In 2024, China was a leading trade partner. Clearly, there's got to be a reflection. I know it's not fashionable in an era of industrial strategy and also of protectionism to say, we've got to look again at free trade, but China is outpacing us. And with that trade, and with $1 trillion spent, and that's the rough estimate of the Belt Road Initiative from 2012 to 24, China has enormous clout in the global south. One of the questions Annie asked me earlier today is, what do you regret? And I think what we should regret, the United States, is the loss of influence and even competitiveness in the vast global south. I'll just give you one example. The Chinese locked up 1 million Uyghurs in Xinjiang province between 2017 and 2019. And the party secretary of Xinjiang told two of my European ambassadors this past autumn that they had done that. They're now trying to cover it up. We, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Australians, the New Zealanders and Americans, Canadians, tried to take China to the UN Human Rights Council and shine a bright light. And guess what? We didn't have the votes. Why didn't we have the votes? Because Belt Road, because of trade, whether it's the indebtedness or the gratitude, frankly, in some cases, of some of these countries. And I worked with all the Arab ambassadors. Not a single one of them stood up for the Uyghur population. So you see the clout that China has. Do I regret that? Absolutely. Because I believe our system's better. I know our values are stronger. I don't want to see the Communist Party of China have this kind of influence in our hemisphere.
That gets to the second area. So we've I think, respectfully disagreed a little bit on economics. Let's turn to diplomacy, where, as you say, China has gained influence, I think, in the global south, just as the US has lost. How important is that arena? And do you think China wants to create a different kind of global system of which it is the hegemon, or does it have a different approach?
So there's one story or fact to illustrate this. Every year, I was in China until the middle of January, and foreign Minister Wang Yi went to Africa the week I left. It was the 35th consecutive year that the Chinese foreign minister, whoever that person is, went symbolically to Africa first as the year began. That's powerful. I was in Beijing last October when President Xi invited 54 heads of government from sub-Saharan Africa. 53 came. He had 33 bilateral meetings in 4 days. You have to put the effort in and the time in. We need to do that. But let me just say something else about the Chinese. I think they were threatened, and I felt it in my bones as I talked to them over the last couple of years by the fact that President Biden strengthened our alliance with Japan, with South Korea, with Thailand, our security partnership with India, our alliance, treaty alliance with Australia, and there are a lot of European officials here tonight, the incredible relationship that we had, that President Biden had with Ursula von der Leyen. And we have our great, Julie Smith, our great ambassador to NATO here, who worked that end of it as I was working the China end of it. We had a consensus on many of these issues about how to push back against China, as well as work with it, from the EU and NATO, as well as the Indo-Pacific allies. The Chinese felt threatened. What did they try to do? They tried to build the BRICS up. The only problem is the BRICS operate by consensus, and India's in it. And they've now got Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. They don't always think, sometimes they're with China, sometimes they're not. The BRICS isn't a competitor to this incredible alliance system that every president has built up since the Second World War. And I've said some supportive things of President Trump, and I meant them. Here's my criticism. You can't question the sovereignty of Denmark about Greenland. You can't contest the whole national history of Canada. Our great friend and neighbor, I would say beloved, I'm from New England, we're neighbors. And you can't make our allies feel subservient to the United States. And I think right now, You know, I'm just reading the way you are. I'm trying to talk to a lot of people. U.S.-Japan tensions on trade, U.S.-South Korean tensions. We're somehow reviewing the AUKUS agreement. Michael Fullylove is here. I hope he speaks this week. He's really smart, from the Lowy Institute in Sydney on this, and we talked about it today. You know, one of the takeaways I wrote about in your magazine was be nice to your allies. Respect them, because they are the difference maker between the United States and China. China has no allies. They've just got some trade partners. That's important. But when the going gets tough, it's the allies you have to count on.
That's a really important point. And it's not just the allies that you laid out, but it's also the other big shift of this administration has been the closure of USAID and the differential approach in Africa and other areas of the global south. Is that an opportunity for China, and is China going to grab it?
Well, the other own goal that I think the Trump administration has scored is, frankly, the abysmal DOGE effort to destroy a great but flawed U.S. government agency and fire 8,500 people in 2 weeks. What CEO here would do that? You got to reform. Sometimes you got to downsize. Sometimes people lose their jobs. But you do it thoughtfully. We didn't do it thoughtfully. What happened? China is out replacing us, where USAID was doing tremendous work on vaccines. PEPFAR, started by George W. Bush. And you can't replace that. The other thing that I regret was concomitant with it. We shut down the Voice of America, and we shut down Radio Free Asia. We thought we had several hundred million listeners in the Chinese-speaking world, in mainland China, in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and they were telling the truth to the Chinese people. They were getting through the firewall. We shut them down. What happened? And I think the New York Times did a really good story on this the other day, and that is CGTN and China Radio just replaced the VOA hours in Indonesia and Ethiopia. You know, their national TV program would give VOA an hour. Now it's been given to the Chinese. So you can't compete in this public diplomacy realm, in the aid realm, in the trade realm, unless you're offering something to people.
Absolutely. I think probably everybody in this audience would second that. I want to make sure there's time for some questions, but so I want to, just before doing that, though, touch on the third and perhaps most alarming aspect of the relationship, which is defense and security, and ask you straight up, how dangerous is the situation in Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is ultimately the most dangerous point on the map between the United States and China. And I was in Beijing on August 2nd, 3 years ago, 2022, when Speaker Pelosi visited Taipei. And by the way, we supported her visit publicly, and I supported it privately with the Chinese and left them in no doubt about that. But the consequence was, since 1954, there's been a median line in the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese forces, the mainland forces, had not really gone beyond that median line permanently, but now you look at the status of forces both on the sea, this is PLA Navy, in the air, their sorties, they're well beyond, they've created a new status quo, well beyond the levels of activity. And I think what most people think about, and I was asked about this in an Aspen program yesterday, well, are they going to invade over 100 miles, of open water? I think the first thing to worry about is a creeping strategy of blockade and of almost strangulation. And that is something that the Chinese have the capacity to do. They may have the will to do. And here again, so important for us. And I went in with my European colleagues, my Japanese colleagues, together to the Chinese to say, if you do something in the Taiwan Strait, there's going to be massive sanctions by the EU, the United States, and Japan. That's 60% of global GDP. I think the Chinese recognize that. And we're just trying to deter them. And so the Biden strategy was to build up the defenses of Taiwan. I'm very glad to see the Trump administration continuing that. And I hope there's been a realization that part of the battle here, Zanny, is that we need to support Ukraine. Because if the Chinese see that Putin gets away with murder in Ukraine and with a huge historical crime, I think that will change for the worse Chinese thinking on what could be possible in Taiwan. I think they'll conclude in China, if the US and Europe didn't save Ukraine or protect Ukraine from Russia, why would they stand up to us on behalf of little Taiwan? And I tried to disabuse the Chinese of this notion. You know, we've had this policy for 52 years of strategic ambiguity, but look at the facts. President Biden was a big supporter of arming Taiwan, and it's good to see the Taiwanese do two things in the last year: acquire and begin to produce drones at a massive scale, and to achieve attack weapons as well. That can be counterproductive for the Chinese Navy.
So strategic ambiguity became a little less ambiguous under President Biden. Do you think, for good or ill, he was pretty clear on several occasions. Do you think President Trump would defend Taiwan if there was an attack or indeed a blockade?
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, it's a really serious question. I can't speculate. I've seen, you know, statements from the campaign which were not encouraging. But then again, I mean, I was appalled when my wife Libby and I watched what happened to President Zelensky in the Oval Office in February. I was appalled when President Trump confused who the victim was and who the aggressor was in that conflict. But then look what happened Monday. And for everyone who's been a critic of President Trump, and I've been a critic, I came out yesterday here in Aspen and said, good for President Trump and Secretary General Mark Rutte of NATO, Europe, NATO and the United States, and we have a NATO foreign minister here from Latvia. We're going to supply weapons together to the Ukrainians. So, and President Trump seems exasperated by Putin. Good. Let's see if it's permanent. We've got to keep the pressure on, but this is a promising, we hope, turnabout by President Trump.
Let's open for a couple of questions in the time we've got left. Yes, lady there, 3 rows back. If you could wait for the microphone and keep it very short so we can get a couple in.
So my name is Anniken, I'm Norway's ambassador. I wanted you to say something on the relationship between China and Russia.
Excellent question. China and Russia.
Okay, I think it's a serious strategic alliance, and it's grounded in two aging, and I can say that because I'm aging too, but a little bit younger than both of them, two aging autocrats. And they have met 52 times. They've called each other their best friends. I think that they have cemented, for the time being, I don't think it's forevermore, a very important strategic alliance between the two countries. I was exasperated by the Chinese in February, March, April of 2022, when they told me we're neutral in the war. They're not neutral in the war. They've protected Russia at the Security Council. They've supplied about 90% of the microelectronics to the Russian Defense Industrial Base. They want Russia to win. And so the Europeans who are here, and we have the Foreign Minister of Iceland, Foreign Minister of Latvia, we have a lot of ambassadors here, I hope they can all speak up this week, they've been exasperated. You know, for our European friends and allies, this is an existential issue. Europe's been divided by Putin between an autocratic Russia and a democratic West. And the Europeans have really put a chill into the EU-China relationship because of this. Chinese are normally, I think, quite good diplomatically, quite sophisticated. They missed this. They were shocked that Europe ended the investment treaty back in 2022, and Europe joined us in sanctions against Chinese companies who were helping Russia. And I know there's an EU-China summit coming up. It doesn't look like it's going to amount to much as long as the Chinese are in the Russian camp, and they are. One more point. There were a series of unequal treaties between the Qing Empire and the Romanovs, and it's interesting, you know, everything's controlled in China. In my last few months in China, obscure academics in regional Chinese universities wrote articles that were published about these unfair treaties. The Chinese remember. And so I don't think this is an alliance. Our alliance with Europe is forever. I don't think this China-Russia alliance is going to take them into the 2040s or 50s. But these two early 70s guys who want to cut the United States and Europe down to size, and Japan, I think it's real for the next, as long as they're both in power, which may be, who knows, another 10 years.
Thank you. Fourth question, yes, gentleman there. There's a microphone coming, if you could just wait for that so everyone can hear your question.
Nick, it's Jonathan Broder from Spy Talk. Several years ago, the Chinese Ministry of State Security rolled up a lot of our intelligence assets in China. And under former CIA Director William Burns, no relation to you, I suppose.
But a very close friend.
Yeah. He began rebuilding our intelligence apparatus in China. My question is, how successful have we been? What is the state of U.S. intelligence?
Jonathan, we are longtime friends.
I had to ask you.
I was a former spokesperson, and I'm a trained diplomat. There's one issue we never talk about, and that's intelligence, so I'm not going to respectfully answer your question. Thank you.
That gives
Let's
time.
have a beer later, but I won't talk about intelligence.
Well attempted and well deflected. Let's gives us time for another question. Yes, gentleman here at the front, but make sure it's a question that can be answered. Front row, gentleman in the corner.
Nick, what's China doing in the Arctic?
So here we have a great American ambassador to Norway, Ambassador Nationson, and we were colleagues separated by several thousand miles. It's interesting. You know, Norway, of course, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, the United States, Canada, certainly, and Russia. I probably left out some charter members of the Arctic Circle. But China considers itself a near Arctic power. So they were always coming to me, because we're a member of the Arctic Council, to see if they can get into the meetings. And we were always trying to deflect Chinese entry into the meetings because we assumed the Chinese would join forces with the Russians, which they often do. But thank you for what you did with our great ally, and I mean that in the case of NATO. You know, pound for pound, the Norwegian military has been beside us in every war. And I want to say one more thing about Canada, because it's such an acute issue for us. On 9/11, I was the ambassador to NATO. And the very first person who came to me in Brussels was the Canadian ambassador, David Wright. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "We're with you. We think we should invoke Article 5. The entire alliance will be with you. Go for it." And I've always remembered the Canadians for that, and the Norwegians. And they all stood up. And Julie was a great American ambassador to NATO. And I'll just say this because Condi Rice is coming in a couple of days.
Anya's standing right there, so
She'll pull us off the stage in a minute. Condi was National Security Advisor. On September 12th, we were just about to invoke Article 5. I figured I needed adult presidential supervision because we knew it was a declaration of war against Osama bin Laden. I called Condi. I said, "I need the president's authority." She said, "Go for it." I said, "Condi, thank you. I need the president's authority." She said, "Go for it." Tried a third time. She said, "Nick, you've got the president's authority." I said, "I will go for it. I'll vote for it." And she said one more thing before we get off the phone. I said, "What's that?" And she said, and I've never forgotten this, "It's good to have friends in the world, and it's good to have allies in the world." And as I've seen some of the attacks on our allies, particularly Denmark and Canada, I've been reminded of that scene. When we were down, when we were hit hard, the Europeans and the Canadians came to our defense. Yep. And they all went into Afghanistan and Iraq with us. So good for them.
So good for the Canadians. Anya, I'm going to ask you to indulge me just for 30 seconds, because that is a wonderful, stirring note on which to end this panel. But I would not be a good journalist if I didn't finally ask you one tougher question. And you're clearly not going to give grades, but maybe you'll give probabilities, which is, over the next 10 years, what odds, you can give ranges, you can give adjectives, do you attach to the risk of outright conflict between the US and China?
So let's end on this, and I'm going to try to give it some hope at the end. I think that there's a major problem, and that is the PLA has been closed to any kind of communication or conversations with the Asian allies, the Australians, Japanese, or with us. During the balloon crisis, I was in Beijing. I was talking to the Vice Foreign Minister of China, and I kept saying to him, what we want is a conversation between Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, because that looks like a military balloon that drifted slowly across the Rocky Mountains all the way to South Carolina. And they refused to talk to Chairman Milley and Secretary Austin. And that was repeated time and again. One of the hopeful things that happened in the last summit between President Biden and President Xi was they agreed that Admiral Sam Paparo, who was to be with us this Thursday in Aspen, the Indo-Pacific commander, would have discussions with the Southern and Eastern Theater commanders of the PLA. They've had a couple of meetings. They've all been made public. But I don't think that has translated in the last couple of months into any improvement. So what I worried about, nightmare scenario, when I was out in Beijing was 2 ships collide by accident or 2 planes collide, and that's happened before, 2001, and we can't even get them on the phone. And so your question's the most serious question. I think there is a possibility, certainly, it's a serious one, that an accident might lead to something that we don't want to have happen. So that gives us 2 things we've got to do. And I really wish President Trump and my successor, David Perdue, and he's a very good man, and I've supported him publicly, President Trump's ambassador to China. He's a good ambassador. We've got to convince the Chinese leadership, that's Xi Jinping, to open up relations between the Defense Department and our mission in China, our embassy, and the PLA. Because if you can do that, and if you have people you can call at 3 in the morning, we can then separate the forces and lower the temperature and avoid a mistake leading to a conflagration. I think it's that serious. And I would end on this point. President Biden's instruction to me and to Secretary Blinken and to Jake Sullivan, all of us, was we've got to live in peace with China too. And I've been encouraged to see President Trump say that. For all the competition, all the complications, and all the mistrust between us, we are too big and too powerful in the nuclear weapons, AI, cyber age to have a probability of going to war together. And so the United States and China have to commit that we're going to compete as structural rivals, but we're going to live side by side, and we're going to live in peace together. And that word peace is too infrequently used in our national discussion. I think it's possible to do this. It's a very complicated situation, but we've got a good ambassador in Beijing right now, and some good people in the Trump administration who I think are onto this. I wish them well.
Very good place to end.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. You just got a real front row seat at what's going on in U.S.-China relations, and we're now going to give you a real front row seat on what our European friends and allies see happening in Ukraine and more specifically in Russia. We have an unbelievable lineup for you all this afternoon. One first is Baiba Braja, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, who also was formerly an Assistant Secretary of NATO, so she knows these issues deeply. Wolfgang Schmidt, who until very recently was what in our system would be like the White House Chief of Staff, the chief officer for the Chancellor Scholz in Germany. He looks much more rested now that he's out of office. We have Thordis Gylfadóttir, who was recently the foreign minister of Iceland and is now a special envoy to Ukraine, so she sees that conflict really up close. And my dear friend Julie Smith, who is just back from Brussels, where she was the permanent representative of the United States to NATO. And Shashank Joshi from The Economist is going to have this discussion for us. Thank you all. Please join us. Thanks. You just come up the middle. Just come up the middle. There you go. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I understand not every panel at this forum will be chaired by The Economist, but the best ones probably are. I'm also very grateful to the Institute for giving, to start this forum, start this discussion, 3 Europeans, 1 honorary European, the chance to discuss this topic, because it isn't always clear where European defence right now stands in US thinking, but I think it's a subject we should get onto, and whether that statement that we just heard from Nick Burns, that Europe is our ally forever, whether that's still something we all can repeat in confidence, whether we can all believe in confidence, and I hope we discuss that. I just want to begin with a couple of very quick reflections. I was at the NATO summit, like several of you, like many of you in the room, just a few weeks ago in The Hague. And before the summit, I spoke to a senior European diplomat in NATO who said, the Americans only want to talk about 5% of spending on defense. The Europeans want to talk about the reasons for 5%. Russia, Ukraine, and some other things. And I thought that summed it up very nicely indeed. But I also thought that the outcome of the summit revealed a certain tension that I'll get our panelists to reflect on, which is at once a pretty momentous outcome, 5% targets, really 3.5% of GDP on defense plus 1.5% on various other fluff, including infrastructure, but rounds up to a nice number. But on a timeline for 2035. And we heard from Mark Rutte, whom Nick mentioned, that the Russian threat to Europe could become extremely serious within 5 years, given the pace of the current build-up. And that discrepancy hangs over European security today. And the final reflection I have is the contrast between the mood that many of us heard in Munich. Julie, I saw you there. Wolfgang, you were there. I'm sure many of you were also there. A sense of trauma, a sense of panic, a sense of real uncertainty following the interventions by Pete Hegseth, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, and then, of course, Donald Trump opening talks with Russia. And the NATO summit, where there was a sense of phlegmatic acceptance, a sense of business-like getting on with things, a sense also that perhaps the worst case hadn't materialized, that actually Trump came out of that summit relatively positive about NATO, and in the last couple of days, more positive noises about Ukraine. So with those sort of three scene setters in mind, Baiba, I'd like to turn to you first. You're a serving foreign minister. You represent a country with excellent intelligence services. I think you're also a reservist with a personal stake in European defence.
Member of National Guard.
Member of the National Guard, not just a sort of minister overlooking this from on high. How acute is the Russian threat to Europe today? Is it something that can unfold on 10 years? Is it Mark Rutte's 5 years? Is it the figure we hear from the head of the German armed forces that it could manifest by the end of the decade? What is it?
I don't think there's one answer. The one word, if you ask me, what is a Russian threat like, it's manageable. Yeah. But it does require action, it does require leadership, it does require the strength that we basically cover under 5%. It's about strength. And when we look at what is the Russian threat, I think it's important to know actually Russia's warfare doctrine. And very often we only think about what we are seeing in Ukraine after 2022. But what was happening before, and before 2014, was also warfare. And that was part of Russia's doctrine. It was preps. It was cyber, it was infops, it was corruption, it was influence gaining, it was everything. It's part of the warfare, and that's happening already. So you cannot separate that conventional and non-conventional parts from each other. And I think understanding that for not only Europeans. When we speak about Europeans, we include Turkey, we include Norway, we include basically everyone in Europe. It's not just EU. It's happening in the US, it's happening in Canada. We all know that. And understanding that wholesome threat is very important, that the preps testing involves strength. But basically for us it's 3 lines of effort that still matter. One is making ourselves strong. So whether it's 5%, for us, some of us it will be more. Because the external border of the EU and NATO, it's not just abstract 1.5%. We are already at 4% purely militarily. So strengthening civil border, you know, the border guards and so on and so forth, customs, but also militarily, ISR, everything. It involves a lot of resources. It doesn't come back to the economy always. That's an issue. You need the GDP to have those 5% from. So the economy actually matters. That's why all the trade disputes actually don't help anybody in that respect. And then, of course, we need very clearly to weaken Russia. That's the cheapest way to sort of delaying Russia's threat that could become more conventional. And strengthening Ukraine. That's the short-term, medium-term issue. And strengthening Ukraine, it's great what President Trump has been doing with regard to coming to the decision-making that, yes, Putin is just bluffing his way through and trying to delay any sort of decision-making in Washington or elsewhere. But in the same time, also clearly recognizing that there is not a single indication in Russia that they want peace. Nothing, not one little bit. Some of the sort of more hidden questions in the questionnaires that are still being done in Russia do show change of attitude with regard to concerns, with regard to the attitude of possible peace with Ukraine and so on and so forth. But in power structure, no change. Politics, military, economy, private sector, religion, media, everything about the war. And so we cannot expect that threat diminishing, whether that's on conventional, on nuclear, or sub-conventional part in the Russian warfare doctrine. So threat is real, it's there, and it's manageable, but it requires strength and clear commitment to weaken Russia, sanctions, and so on and so forth.
So deterrence holds, deterrence can hold, and the view expressed by Secretary General Rutte that if you don't spend 5%, start learning Russian, that may be a slightly unhelpful view in your framing.
Secretary General is different from Secretary General before.
certainly more effusive in his text messages.
And he, he expresses himself differently, just like US presidents do. But again, speaking about where we are with the US, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, all the US administrations have said to nations in Europe who are not spending on defense, because you can't say Europeans, because we are Europeans, we'll be spending more than 5%.
We'll come back to Europe in defense.
But those messages wake people up. And the way President Trump spelled it out, yes, it's very sometimes different, but in the same time, both in his first administration and today, it does bring results. It does bring results.
Thordis, can I turn to you, given your involvement in Ukraine and your prior experience as well? It is clear that whilst we've avoided the worst case of a complete cut-off of US weapons, of critical munitions, of Patriot interceptors, we've avoided that, it seems. We're in a sort of still a new world where Europe is expected to pay for US weapons. Europe has to take, as in conventional defense, so too on Ukraine. Europe is expected to stand up. So the question I want to ask you is, do you feel Europeans have a strategy? Is the aim simply to keep Ukraine armed to a sufficient degree to survive? Or is there something beyond this? Is there an end state that you think Europeans have in mind that they are aiming to with this?
Well, I mean, first I would say, I think most of us realize now that the war in Ukraine is literally a test of everything we stand for. And I actually agree with the diplomat that, put in one sentence about the 5% and then, what are we ready to defend? I hear the statements. I know that the defense spending has increased, but I also know the only reason we still have the time, because we always say we need more time, Europe needs more time, we need more time to find the money, to increase production and all of that. The only reason we have that time is because of the fighting spirit of Ukrainians. So, I hear the statements, but we are not doing enough. We are not doing it fast enough. And we say that we're in it for as long as it takes. Me personally, I'm getting very tired of that line, because for as long as it takes, what does that mean? I would say that connects with your question. I would say that we should be in it for Ukraine to win, for Russia to lose, and to send a very strong signal to other autocrats that are thinking about something similar. And in that regard, I think it's extremely important that, because I have had conversations with people from the US, where they've said, we can't be supporting Ukraine as much because we have to worry about China. And I said, well, you do see how that connects. And some people say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. We have to focus on China, and we can't do what we should be doing with regards to Ukraine. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding. So, we're not doing it enough. We're not doing it fast enough. And the only reason we still have time, and things have not gotten worse in other countries in Europe, is because of Ukraine. So instead of, they always say thank you. I can say for myself, and I think we should all rethink that, and it should be us thinking them and not the other way around.
I imagine there are a great number of Europeans who'd wholeheartedly agree, by many of those in your region, but there are also a great many who would not, and would say that realistically the end state is going to be arming Ukraine to achieve an imperfect diplomatic solution in which we will give up many unpleasant and unpalatable things. That is the consensus in Europe, is it not?
Yeah, but I mean, again, I think we also have to understand what they are fighting for. The Ukrainians are not only fighting for their internationally recognized territories. They are fighting for a change in how the society operates. They are fighting for a society that they've already made a decision that they have become and will continue on that path. So for them, it's not only about the territory. It's about what kind of society they want to have. So yes, there might be, let's say there was a ceasefire. There would be some sort of peace negotiations. However that will turn out, the main thing is, will they be able to pursue what they want, which is to become a member of European Union, also NATO, and I actually think that, worst case scenario for Europe would end up being, we would be calling them, asking them to join NATO, because if you would have to call a friend in time of a, very difficult conflict or a crisis or a war, I think many, many European countries would actually want to call the Ukrainian friends because they know how to fight the Russians.
Wolfgang, I appreciate your views on that, but also more broadly, I'd like to put a broader hypothesis to you, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree, which is that the sense is now Europe has bought itself some time. It's in the midst of, the title of our panel is Tanks But No Tanks. I think that would have been completely fair as a title many previous years. Maybe it's a little bit less fair this year when certainly your country is in the midst of a huge tank buying spree that puts many other countries to shame on the sheer scale of the armor it's procuring, as well as many other capabilities. But the view is that Europe has avoided the risk of a disorderly, chaotic US retreat, but it now has a number of years, but perhaps less than it thinks, to stand on its own feet, to build a European defense, but we can't do it in under 7 or 8 years. This is a task of a decade. Is that how you think? Is that how you saw it in office? Is that how it's a fair way to see it? Is that a reasonable strategy to proceed?
Yeah, and that is what is agreed upon, or was agreed upon at the NATO summit and beforehand with the NATO Secretary of Defense, so that we have 10 to 15 years. But obviously, we try to speed up our defense spending. No,
15 is optimistic, Wolfgang.
Yeah, I'm a member of the working group of optimists in politics, and I continue to be that. Actually, now money is not the constraining factor. It's industry capacity. And sometimes I had the feeling it's industry by name only. It's like craftsmen's, like building very beautiful and very expensive weapons. And we need to get to speed. And so what we need to do as one of the countries that produces quite a lot of good stuff, like IRIS-T for air defense, we need more countries to buy so that the company that produces that would ramp up production. And the same goes true for ammunition. And then we also need, and our defense secretary just did an interview with the FT, also urging industry to ramp up production and not waiting that you have a guaranteed 10-year contract where we guarantee you from the very beginning that we're going to buy half of the production. A little bit of capitalistic risk appetite, and I think it's nearly a risk-free environment at the moment, given the 3.5% for defense spending. And what we decided, the new government decided, is that now we got rid of our debt brake for defense. We're going to speed up coming to the 3.5%. So we said we're going to reach that in 2029, which is an incredible increase in defense spending. But yes, it is complicated, and we really need to turn everything, because the system got very complacent as well, both on the industrial side, but also like our procurement, the tenders. As you all know, we have 130 different weapon systems in Europe. Meanwhile, the US has 30, because there's a lot of competition between European companies. Then we need a fair share if we do joint European like fighter jets. I negotiated personally several times with our friends in France, because like everybody's obviously protecting also their own industry, and that kind of thinking we need to overcome. And then I'm optimistic.
And just very briefly also on Ukraine, because it's no secret that Germany was among the countries that was somewhat more skeptical on the NATO question. I mean,
yeah, but at the same time, and people tend to forget that when there's so much euphoria, we were by far the second largest provider of military aid to Ukraine in the world, and by far the largest in Europe. Had Great Britain done the same we've been doing, they would have doubled actually their support to Ukraine. And people somehow forget that. We didn't talk too much, so our PR department was not as good as others, but actually our production was pretty good in our delivery unit. I think that the problem is, and everybody applauds and we all want Ukraine to win, but the real question is the one that you ask, and that is so difficult to even discuss in broader public, and that's the tough discussions we are having with the Ukrainian friends. What is realistic in confronting a nuclear power? So is the idea to win back Crimea a realistic one? Probably most of us think it is. It would be great, but it's not so realistic. And so the question, when we tell them you have to win, especially in the beginning, don't we put too much pressure also on poor President Zelensky, also internally, because he will, and he did it now, he will have to sell tough decisions to his people, and that's not easy. So I think it's a very complicated issue, but definitely we have to help them to withstand this Russian aggression, and obviously like international law, like us as human beings, as freedom-loving people, we would like them to win back all the territory. And at the same time, I think the approach that President Zelensky took in the last months is probably a more realistic one. Nevertheless, we don't know how to end that. And so I'm less optimistic on the joint strategy that we have here. And my feeling very often now that I'm out of office is, and my frustration is, that we didn't discuss these questions honestly most of the times.
Torres, did you want to quickly say something before I turn to Julie?
Just because I'm not talking on behalf of anyone in Ukraine, but I just think, again, because of, if we understand what they're fighting for, I would assume that for them the primary thing is to have the possibility to be the society that they want, which is free, prosperous, without corruption, protects human rights, and is allowed to be a part of, European Union and other alliances that they want. So I don't think that it's not, either you have the 100% of the former of the internationally recognized territory, or there's nothing. It's the fundamental thing is that they are allowed to build up a society that they're fighting for.
Julie, can I turn to you, because a lot of these issues, and particularly whether we have that 10 to 15 years to do this, depends on choices made by the United States. I saw you in February at Munich, and I quoted you in a piece I wrote, and I think you said to me, the lights are blinking red on the risk of. At that time, we didn't quite know what was happening and what might happen on US decisions in Europe. When I now talk to US officials, the mood is actually that they feel there won't be dramatic changes to force posture in Europe. They're quite relaxed. They think, troop numbers will remain broadly stable. Of course, there will be some reductions, but there will be a fairly orderly, calm process, not the sort of hints of what we've seen in South Korea, or with sort of rapid reviews of posture in unexpected ways. Are we being complacent?
No, not necessarily. I mean, in truth, we don't know what the result of the Global Posture Review is going to be. I certainly don't know what's going on behind closed doors. But there are certain scenarios that do give me pause. And I think if you look at the 20,000 additional U.S. troops that were put into Eastern Europe when the war started, there is a risk that those troops come out quickly. And there's two scenarios of how Europe responds to that. On the one hand, Europe could say, all right, the US needs to focus elsewhere, roger that, and we're going to fill the gap. We're going to do more in Eastern Europe and enhance deterrence so that Moscow understands that they cannot touch NATO territory. That would be a delight. There's another scenario, however, where Europeans, some Europeans say to themselves, the U.S. feels comfortable leaving Eastern Europe right now. That may signal that they don't see the Russian threat to be as acute as it was when they sent those troops in the first place. Therefore, we too could withdraw or reduce some of our troop presence in Eastern Europe. But that's just the Eastern European piece. There's a bigger question, and that is, will the Trump administration be comfortable withdrawing troops that are based in Germany and Italy? And there, you really then have a dilemma for the NATO alliance, because despite the increase in spending and the really fantastic summit that we just had, and we should feel good about what just happened at the NATO summit, great result. But as we have also noted this evening, it will take time for Europe to spend those resources in a way that it could make up for any gaps in any of those three locations, particularly as it relates to the enablers, things like lift, air-to-air refueling, missile defense. There's a long list there, ISR in particular, where Europe is not in a position today to fill those gaps if it so desired. So my understanding is that NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has assurance from President Trump that it will be an orderly withdrawal. It will be slow and steady, whatever the outcome ultimately is. Allies will be consulted. I hope that's how it unfolds. But I think based on what we've seen over the last couple of months, I think it's understandable for all of us to question whether or not it will unfold as planned.
I'm going to come back to you in just a second, Julie, but Biber first. When you look at those two possible European responses to the vacuum that's left, or the gap that's left, a reinforcement of Eastern Europe, a sense that we'll do more to deter in the way that you said at the beginning, or a sense that actually sort of standing back a little bit with these threats not that acute. What are you hearing when you talk? I'm not asking you to name individual countries, but what mood are you getting out of your allies and partners on this?
Listen, there hasn't been a single message that US is going to leave Europe. I mean, that's not the way the discussions take place. That's not how the discussion goes about. We have to be very aware that those capabilities that US has in Europe not always are useful elsewhere. If it's about threats in the Indo-Pacific from China, that's actually quite different.
We need more air and maritime forces.
Again, I'm not going to go into details, but the military side really knows when they talk about it and what is needed, what is not. The same with the Middle East. We saw what was happening when the situation was brewing there. Very much of US posture was related, actually, to what they had in Southern Europe and Central Europe. And those 20,000 forces and President Biden's decisions were greatly appreciated. Quick, efficient, fast. They are training. They're not sitting in the barracks or something. They're actually doing very efficient training, and that posture changes. Like now we had the big Baltops exercise. It was entirely different from what we had before. Different troops, different speed, different capabilities involved. And that's what the allies in Europe are doing. We are developing the biggest single military range, brigade-size maneuvering with electronic warfare, live bombing, night flights, everything, drones, everything.
The sort of thing it's harder to do in Britain or Germany.
Where it's difficult to do elsewhere. And that is in accordance with the US requirements. And that is what interests the US forces. So we are in pretty good sort of relationship in terms of discussing and talking about it. But then, of course, the posture review matters because threats are threats. And Nick was just talking about where we are with China, and you didn't mention the nuclear, you didn't mention the conventional forces that China has, the space, and so on and so forth. And that's real, that's there. So we just have to be aware that it's all there. China is not explaining why it has done so. There is no real dialogue ongoing on that in substance. So not picking up the phones when it matters, but why the nuclear? Why such capabilities are being developed? And that's something that it's not only the US that realizes. China is enabling Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia would already have lost the war if not for China.
I'm glad you raised China, and I wanted to connect the conversation to where Nick left off, which is, just Julie, to you for a moment. The UK has an aircraft carrier strike group in the Pacific right now. Germany has sent frigates in the last 18 months. The Italians have sent naval assets. There's a lot of European interest in involvement. It is reported that Bridge Colby, the Pentagon's policy chief, told the British that he doesn't want them there. We don't want you there. You're diluting your effort in Europe. Stay in your lane. Very different message to the one that the Biden administration delivered, which was there is utility in your presence, in an intermittent, moderate presence. How do you weigh this? Do you think there is a risk that Europe could dilute what are relatively scarce naval assets, for example, in the Pacific, when it really should be focusing on the High North, the Med, these theaters that are quite severely contested?
Well, it's more than just sending a frigate into the South China Sea. I mean, what we did at NATO through the last administration was to bring our Indo-Pacific partners closer to the NATO alliance. They were frequently coming through the front door of the alliance to brief allies on how they tackle things like cybersecurity attacks. I mean, in many ways, our friends in the Indo-Pacific face challenges from China that mirror how our friends in Europe are facing challenges from Russia. And given what Nick Burns just talked about, this deepening partnership between Russia and China, we thought it would be fruitful and productive, and it was, to bring America's Indo-Pacific allies together with our European allies. And it yielded some really interesting results. I would just note, when North Korea sent 11,000 troops to Russia to fight Ukrainians, South Korea came into the alliance to brief allies on who those forces were. And that was a really interesting, concrete example of the value of Indo-Pacific allies working with European allies. So above and beyond a ship sailing through the South China Sea and the naval presence, all of that's important, but what's also important is deepening those partnerships. And what I fear and what I do hear from some European friends is that this administration sees less value in that. And I think it would be a tragic mistake to lose sight of one of America's greatest assets, and that is the allies we have across the Pacific, the allies we have across the Atlantic, and our ability to bring them together.
Wolfgang, can I turn to you and again ask, we've talked about US force posture in Europe and US intentions, but we sort of must circle back to the question that Zanny asked Nick about President Trump in Taiwan. And the equivalent on our panel is very simple, which is, do you believe that President Trump would meet his Article 5 obligations in a serious contingency?
Yes. And we are trying everything to make sure that this will hold also in the next months and years. And I think the NATO summit showed that he also understands what is at stake. And so, yes, I do believe that it will hold.
Can you just give us a line of reasoning to justify that conclusion?
Well,
Extra points.
It's that
I admire your optimism.
He's talking a lot about stuff, and then at the end he's not doing a lot of what he was saying. And
you're avoiding using a well-known acronym, but you're conveying
yes, I know.
the point. Yeah.
My ex-wife is Mexican. So I think there is at the end a belief also in the system, you might call the deep state, that we need allies. And obviously it's the final decision of the US president, but it's so interlinked what we see. And he probably also felt good at the NATO summit, and Mark Rutte made sure that he feels that way. And I think he sees, and we've seen that in Trump 1, and I know Trump 2 is different from Trump 1, that at the end, he was sticking to what we agreed upon. So that's where my optimism is coming from. But obviously nobody can look into his head. And if we were to think that Article 5 is not worth what it is, then we were in deep trouble. But that is why we, on the conventional side, doing everything. And so, for example, to Judy's question, well, Germany is deploying 5,000 people, like a brigade, to Lithuania.
Which no other European European
yeah, but
country has
others
done
are
on
doing,
that.
like at the eastern flank, in Poland. And, I mean, think about it. German troops in the Baltic that would have been unthinkable of even 20 years ago. And now they're welcomed, and that's a good thing. So I think we're living up to the moment, and former Chancellor Scholz proposed a European Sky Shield initiative to protect the whole of Europe. And we develop deep precision strike capabilities to conventionally deter Russia, also hopefully in 10 to 15 years without the help of our American friends. So, like, better safe than sorry, but Article 5 will hold, and the Europeans are doing everything that also in the foreseeable future, the deterrence that we offer is enough against Russia. But the capabilities that we are lacking are there, and that's a clear problem, no? Including intelligence.
You were nodding along.
Absolutely, I agree on President Trump. The meeting itself was very good, the Hague meeting, and both on substance and form, and the leaders were very open to each other, and it was very constructive, which is what matters when you are with allies. You don't want just to do sort of pre-recorded, well-known text. And just like it was with President Biden, you remember, Julie, when there was some pretty free discussions around the table and leaders, running across to each other to explain what they meant and then arguing with each other. So that's what you do when you are with allies and friends, and you can be pretty straightforward. But on the capabilities and Europe, I mean, institutionally, EU actually has done a lot. And also fast for the EU, because it's organization very much around the unanimity on CSDP, CFSP, which is the Common Foreign Security Policy and Defense Policy. And what has been achieved is that the EU will be funding through 800 billion program, Rearm Europe, the same capability gap that have been identified in the NATO defense plans. So essentially, Europe is putting its money where the needs are. And that is something that we did not expect to see happening so fast. Now, of course, it relates to what Wolfgang was saying, what we all know. It's the fragmentation of the industry, it's the standardization. We have American howitzers, we will be building Rheinmetall factory. We actually need those 155 ammunitions to fit the American howitzers. And it's pretty straightforward. It's NATO standard. One of the standards, but there's a problem. So it's about that adjustment and the realities that it's not about standards on paper, but reality there. And the third point is actually the talent, because what you saw was the Ukrainian operation taking out 70 billion worth Russian
Operation Spider's Web.
strategic, Putina. Spider's Web, exactly. It was about the talent, the knowledge, the ability to innovate, prepare, But it was the use of very simple, very straightforward capability. It was off-the-shelf drones. It was not something that it was, billions worth equipment. So the talent that we have in Europe, in our country, it needs to be freed. It needs to be freed, and that is, of course, something that, again, relates to regulation, and that is the strength of Europe, strength of EU, but also a weakness. So that is something that, through the whole process, needs to be just sort of opened up and freed. And I think we are getting there. From what I'm seeing in Latvia with our drone industry, with our quant industry, and so on and so forth, why do Latvia produces 20% of world's algorithms in quant? Because of talent, because of the people, because we have enabled it, because there is a team doing that, and so on and so forth. So we do have that, and putting it together within the alliance, and not forgetting that when we talk about Crimea or the south of Ukraine, Turkey has said, we will never accept it as legally Russian. We will never do that. They have a strategic interest in the north coast of the Black Sea not being Russian forever. And it's just, again, we keep forgetting when we talk about Europe that there is a geopolitical player that is very strong. And when Italy speaks about Libya and the concerns they have for Libya, we know how we need to work together with quite a number of other actors to actually address that threat. And that's, not only migration, but all types of other issues.
As we approach the end of our conversation, Torzis, can I come back to you and just to get a sense of whether this really is an inflection point in Europe, how serious this moment is. I talked about German rearmament and, on an incredible scale, just incredible, and then cultural steps like the deployment to Lithuania, not to mention many other things like the assistance to provide long-range strike, help Ukraine build long-range strike capabilities. But your country is also in its way undergoing a serious debate around the question of a standing army, the question of an intelligence service, which also speaks to the same really powerful current of change in Europe. Can you just give us a sense from that sort of high north, mid-Atlantic perspective, how does it feel to you, and does it feel different this time?
It really does, and I think there's not like one specific thing. It's just when you look at all that is happening, and what they have in common is that, often when I come to and sit in a panel like this, the moderator, which you have not done, and I thank you for that, say, and please be optimistic. Please, be hopeful and end on a happy note. And I'm like, but why? Like, why should I end on a happy note and being optimistic? I'm I am in the category as well of being optimistic, and I'm grateful for being alive, and I see the beautiful things, and I want to be optimistic. But if you just look at what is happening in the world, I'm just not that optimistic. I'm sorry. But what I can say is that, if people would ask me, do you believe we have what it takes? Definitely. Do you believe that Europe can, really show and lead by courage, confidence, speed up production? Do you believe that Europe can be competitive, that we have an amazing, talent pool, that we can do all these things? I mean, we all talk about the natural resources and they are limited. The resource that is the most important one is very unlimited. And that is just the human, resource. But what does the human being need for that? It needs to be free. And so the individual rights and these values is what it's all about, and that is the same for Ukraine. And that's also what Putin is most afraid of. He's not afraid whether he will be, fought back with the territory that he gained. He's afraid whether Ukraine will be able to pursue what it wants. That's what he's afraid of. And so I would hope that Europe, with North America and then other allies as well, that we are ready to defend what is most important for each and every human being. Ukraine is showing us that they are ready to do so. We know that we have what it takes, but will we do it? In the time we have? I don't know. I mean, I truly hope so. I come from my generation was promised that the things that we're seeing would never happen again. And then they did. So you know, I try to be optimistic. I know we can, but whether we will, I hope so.
And I will
Very
also
briefly,
conclude not on a very sort of positive basis. Actually, what I think was what I started is this some subconventional threat. It's cheaper to take countries over from within, preparing the grounds and taking over the leadership at the highest possible level, and get them do what they want. And that way, splitting EU or NATO or whatever. And that is, I think, the way we should look at it, and should be aware that this is what's happening.
Thank you, Barbara, for reminding us it's not just conventional defence. And thank you all for a very stimulating panel and your thoughts.
Thanks to our wonderful panel. Well, tonight's just a flavour of what's yet to come. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd encourage you to please look frequently at the agenda. Hit refresh. As you know, we've had a lot of changes, and planes continue to be diverted to Grand Junction. It is beautiful on I-70 this time of year, but I don't recommend it. Thank you so much. We'll start promptly tomorrow morning with an out of the world panel on space. Now I'd invite you all to walk through the meadows, please, and we'll have a reception for all Aspen Security Forum pass holders at Dor Hosier, where you picked up your credentials. Thank you, and thanks to the panel.
Good afternoon. Great to see you, Prime Minister. This is Prime Minister's first visit also to China. And
as Prime Minister.
Yeah, as Prime Minister.
I'm no stranger to China.
No.
I've come to China almost every year.
And you speak the language, huh?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And I think Singapore is also the largest investor in China still.
Yes, we are.
And
for 12 consecutive years.
Yeah. And I think you were also in Beijing and meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Yeah. That went well?
It went very well.
Yeah. And the mood was good? The mood was good?
Well, we have a close partnership, very broad and substantial, a very unique partnership. We call it an all-round, high-quality, future-oriented partnership.
Wow. That sounds very substantial.
It sounds better in Mandarin.
Does it? A lot of things sounds better in Mandarin. Also when you say slow is fast, you know, or a crisis, I think has a double meaning.
Yes, 危机.
Yeah. So maybe Prime Minister, I know that you have a few initial thoughts, and then we'll have a dialogue for half an hour.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Birgit, for the introduction. I think we are meeting at a time of profound changes in the world. After the end of the Cold War, the world saw an unprecedented period of global integration, characterized by open markets, rapid trade, free trade, rapid movement of capital, goods, ideas, and people across borders. This brought benefits to many people, and for a long time this vision held true. Davos embodied this vision, a vision that global integration would deliver peace and shared prosperity. Unfortunately, I think the world is changing, and the we see over the years more pressures. Discontent against globalization has risen. It started way back. I remember in 1999 when the WTO was held in Seattle, you already had demonstrations and protests there. But since then, year after year, you see in advanced economies, cities being destroyed because factories are closed, livelihoods get disrupted, jobs are displaced, and in more recent years, because of COVID and the concerns over supply security, because of conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, now concerns about security have risen, and we are in a very different position today. The global norms, global rules are weakening, global institutions are weakening, and economic nationalism is replacing win-win cooperation. For small countries like Singapore, we are worried because we have limited options, we have limited bargaining power, and we risk being marginalized. But even bigger countries, I think, will have challenges dealing and operating in such a new environment because it will be harder for everyone to deal with common threats, be it pandemics, climate change, or financial shocks. So I think our response has to be collectively to try and still harness forces that will bring people together, promote integration, bring down barriers, and strengthen multilateralism. Multilateralism that is more resilient, more inclusive, and better suited to the realities of our time. So Singapore will do our part in this endeavor, whether it's forging partnerships, updating global rules, or advancing dialogue, working together with partners like the WEF. The efforts may seem small and incremental, but if like-minded countries everywhere were to do our part, then collectively I think we can make a difference. And then step by step, hopefully we can lay the groundwork for a new and more stable global order in time to come.
Thank you. I think Prime Minister deserves an applause for that. Picking up on your last point, what kind of order or more stable system could we foresee in the future? I think we had one world order after the Cold War, and that order is not really there anymore, but we don't know what is coming. The Premier lead this morning said we have to avoid the law of the jungle, or the jungle growing back. But how do you see this new system of cooperation? You could see a more multipolar system, but at the same time you see soft power replaced with strong power. You see interest spheres also being developed. So multipolarity is one thing, but aren't we seeing more a system of interest sphere? And that for smaller, medium-sized countries would be quite a challenge.
It is going to be a challenge. I think, frankly, no one knows what this new order will look like. It's still very early days. We are in a period of transition and a period of evolution. There will be critics of today's system that say it's good that now the system is changing. But I would also say let's have a care. Let's not be too quick to cheer, because what is the alternative? So we have to think through very carefully how we can evolve a better system. And I'll give you two examples of global institutions that have come under pressure, but over the years have been able to reform and upgrade themselves. First, the IMF. I started work as a young economist in the 90s, so I still remember vividly the 1997 Asian financial crisis. People till today call it the IMF crisis. Because the IMF came in with strict austerity, one-size-fits-all measures, and there was a reaction. But look, over the years, the IMF has reformed, it's updated itself, it's customized its approaches, become more responsive, more transparent, and it has taken into account local circumstances and context. It's an improved, upgraded IMF. To be clear, there's still reforms to be done. For example, and in particular, where it comes to the shareholding and governance structure, which still reflects a world after World War II. and needs to be adjusted to better reflect the realities of today's economy. But that's one work that needs to be done and can be done in order for the IMF to maintain its credibility and legitimacy. Second, the WTO. It has brought about free trade, a rules-based trading system which has benefited many countries, but there is a feeling that the system is not working as well. And indeed, some of the WTO rules have lagged behind the realities of today's economy, particularly in digital trade. So what do we do? And again, the response is not to jettison the rules, but to think about how it can be improved. And a few countries, like-minded countries, Singapore working with Japan and Australia, we have come together to initiate a joint initiative on e-commerce. And after 5 hard years of negotiation, today more than 70 countries have agreed on the first set of rules for digital trading. It's the building block for the first set of global rules on digital trade. And I give these illustrations to show that it is possible to update, evolve, improve the multilateral system and global institutions that we have today. It is painstaking work, but there is no alternative. A new system does not just appear by magic. You have to work at it. And with creative, pragmatic solutions, bringing along like-minded countries, if we are able to start some of this work, do the building blocks one by one, then in time to come, others that are more ready can join in. So this is what we would call a flexible multilateralism. It's not about ad hoc array of different rules, but starting first, laying the building blocks, and eventually others can join in, and we can steer progress in the right direction.
It's very interesting, this notion of flexible multilateralism, because congratulations on getting an agreement around, I think, what they call these plurilaterals on this e-commerce. It means that countries that have common interests come together, and now we have more than 70 of them, and forming like trade rules in e-commerce.
That's right.
And later on, it can be more and more people, more and more countries contributing or being part of it, and then it could even turn into something that is multilateral.
Yes.
But with all these kind of more plurilaterals and also bilateral trade agreements,
they get too complicated,
and regional ones and all that, don't we end up with a big spaghetti bowl then?
There is that concern. But again, I ask, what is the alternative? Do nothing? It cannot be do nothing and hope that someday along the way something new emerges out of nowhere. I think we have to start from somewhere. And if we start with like-minded countries, putting in place some basic building blocks, but always with a view that whatever we do, it is open, it's inclusive. Others may not be ready to join, but in time to come they can join, and we can multilateralize these efforts.
Exactly. Have also Singapore changed its approach? I think traditionally you were doing more trade agreements under multilateral agreements like WTO, but have you now embarked on bilateral trade agreements, mega regional ones? Are you know, some countries are really getting a lot of agreements there. I think number one is Chile with like 100 of them.
Well, we did start with many bilateral FTAs too.
Yeah.
And then over time, these FTAs became the building blocks for a more robust multilateral system. Yeah. Today, when we look at the situation and some of the rising barriers to trade, again, our response would be to still work at reforming and updating the WTO, but in parallel, we are engaging with like-minded countries to find ways in which we can strengthen our trade and investment links. And we start with the countries nearest to us. Yeah. Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, we have a special economic zone now with Johor in Malaysia. We are working with Indonesia, where there's a free trade zone in the Riau Islands just next to us. So we have very close links with our closest neighbors. But even within Southeast Asia, we have a very close link with Vietnam. The Prime Minister of Vietnam is here. We have a connectivity agreement. We are doing something like more than 20 industrial parks in Vietnam. And then for the whole of ASEAN, we are looking at ways to better integrate ASEAN and make us more united, be able to offer a more competitive single market to investors. So that's within ASEAN. But outside of our region, we are also engaging different blocs. We already have very close links with China, Japan, Korea, India in Asia. But we are engaging outside of Asia, for example, with the EU, with the GCC, with Latin America. So we are trying to find ways to strengthen links with like-minded entities everywhere around the world.
If you look at global economy, we've seen that the growth this year was expected 3.2, then it was revised to 2.8,
yes.
Now to 2.5. Some have revised it down even to 2.3.
Yeah.
And WTO said the other day that on goods, they even expect maybe a contraction
yes.
of 1.5%. So trade used to be the driver of growth. I guess we need to find a different driver of growth moving forward. Could that be the new technologies? Could it replace trade? And how fundamental is the changing also on the trading landscape and the economic landscape? How do we avoid a sluggish growth for a decade to come like in the 70s?
I think trade will still exist. There is a move towards security, resilience, greater self-sufficiency, but frankly, no one can be completely self-sufficient. Trade will still be around. Maybe it will not grow as much as it used to, but I believe there will still be trade, but the patterns of trade will change and evolve. Different supply chains, different configurations, and for Singapore, we just want to remain competitive and relevant and stay at the center of these evolving trade links. So trade remains relevant, but changing patterns. Technology will be a new driver, I'm quite sure of that. I think the move towards sustainability will also be another driver. We all want to decarbonize, we want to get to net zero, we will need to harness new sources of clean and renewable power. We need to decarbonize industries. So both technology, new technologies, especially digital technologies and sustainability will power the economy of the future.
It's interesting we heard it this morning too, that digital trade is growing 8%,
yes.
while seeing trade in goods, manufactured goods, is almost peaking. We also see services are growing much faster.
Yeah.
I guess this is relatively good news for Singapore, though, because you're strong in services and you're strong on the digital and technology side.
We want to be strong in everything. But yes, we have some strengths. We have some strengths in financial services, logistics. We have some strengths in digital technologies, and we will continue to harness these strengths to stay competitive and relevant. Life is always difficult for a small country. History has never been kind to small nations. So we have to work extra hard compared to bigger countries to keep relevant and stay alive.
But the 60 last years have not been that bad for Singapore, though. It's a miracle, isn't it?
It's not, we think it's nothing short of a miracle, and so my mission is to keep this miracle going for as long as I can.
And it seems like the voters in Singapore approved by your policies. I think you increased your party's result with 6 percentage points.
I'm very grateful for their mandate.
Yeah, and not all incumbent parties can say that, at least not in Europe.
I can't speak about politics in Europe. I only care about, I can only manage the politics in my country. Which is enough for me.
And managing politics in Singapore means that you also have to deal with the big players, because you're such an open economy. As I said at the beginning, through Singapore, you are the largest FDI, foreign direct investor, in China,
yes.
but I guess in many ASEAN countries too. And now you have to maneuver between your special friends in the US and in China. How do you balance that?
Yeah, well, that's the favorite question that gets asked of Singapore in conferences like this. I'm surprised it took you a while to get to the question.
I wanted to warm you up and hope for a different answer, you know?
Well, the simple response is we have good relations with both. We have broad and substantial relations with both America and China. And I know everyone monitors and tracks what we say and what we do very closely, trying to parse every hidden meaning behind every word, behind every action, whether we are moving closer to one or the other. But that's not how we look at things. That's not the way we approach it.
And because currently we are in China too, so.
Yeah, I know. And maybe tomorrow when I'm in America, then they think differently. But our starting point is that we look at things from Singapore's point of view in advancing Singapore's national interest. Our interests are to have close, good relations on substance with both America and China. And we will continue to do whatever we need to do to promote and advance Singapore's interest. It's not about balancing between the two superpowers, but it's about being consistent and principled in advancing and promoting Singapore's interests. And that's what we will continue to do. And I think if we continue to do so in a consistent and principled manner, our partners, whether it's America or China or other countries, will see us more as a reliable and trusted partner that we can work with. I would say also that Singapore's position is not unique. We want to be friends with both America and China and to have good relations with them, cooperate on win-win areas. But it's not just us. All of Southeast Asia would like to do the same. And within ASEAN in particular, no single country in ASEAN may have that same size and scale. But when you add ASEAN up altogether collectively, we are not small. We have considerable heft. We are 700 million people, a sizable economy. And ASEAN has the ability to shape its own destiny, to shape its own future. ASEAN was the arena for proxy wars during the Cold War. We don't want that to happen again. So ASEAN's approach is very clear. We reject zero-sum competition. We embrace engagement with not just America and China, but with other major powers. And we want all to be engaged in this region, in Southeast Asia. America is the largest investor still in Southeast Asia. China remains the largest trading partner. We want both to be actively engaged. We want other major powers to be actively engaged. And we want the region to be an open and inclusive arena where people have stakes in the region and we can all work together for shared prosperity. And ASEAN will work towards that objective.
But ASEAN is quite a diverse group
It
too.
is.
So,
hence the work to integrate and to make ASEAN stronger and more united.
How is the single market going?
Becoming better and better each and every day.
With baby steps or big steps?
Yeah, we will keep trying. I would say, if you think about it, there is already a very intricate supply chain connecting ASEAN. You can have, for example, cotton from the Philippines being spun in Thailand, dyed, and then stitched together into garments in Vietnam or Indonesia and exported to the world. And
shipped out of Singapore?
Possibly out of our ports, with HQ in Singapore, with R&D done in Singapore. So it's an entire ASEAN supply chain, which it already exists today, and we are continuing to find ways to bring down barriers. We are largely tariff-free today, but I think the barriers are also in non-tariff areas. And we are trying to find ways to bring down barriers, to integrate our economies, our payment systems, a whole range of things to make ASEAN more competitive and to offer ourselves as that single market to investors.
Prime Minister, you said that your role is to advance Singapore's interest and also to be a reliable partner. But is it more complex today because of the fragmented geopolitical landscape we're faced with to advance interest than in the past?
For sure. I readily acknowledge that. My job is harder.
And sometimes you can end up between a rock and a hard place, but it doesn't seem like Singapore has ended up there so far.
So far, no, and we hope we won't end up there as well. If we end up in a hard place, it's not just us. Many other countries will also end up in a hard place, and I think the consequence of that will be disastrous for the world. So we hope we will never get there.
We were very close to almost a full-fledged war in the Middle East. It could have also ended up with spreading to the Gulf countries. Yes. And it seems like this is cooling or calming down.
We hope so.
Yes. And then we have, for the first time, a major war in Europe happening. How worried are you for the future that we could again see wars happening? And even if you're seeing sluggish economic growth today, just imagine if the war between Israel and Iran had spread and a closure of the Strait of Hormuz would have happened. It would have had devastating consequences. What can we do to mitigate the risks? And the NATO meeting is happening now, and they're increasing their aspirations to 5% of GDP to the military. Yeah. Who would have thought that? It was controversial. Last time I was at the NATO meeting, it was controversial to go up to 2%.
Yes. As I said just now, it's a different world because the accumulation of discontent against globalization, as well as a combination of recent experiences with COVID and security concerns have led to a situation where today security is a paramount concern of many countries. And so it's not just about military spending, it's about more resilient, more secure supply chains, for fear that along the way, if something were to happen, if push comes to shove, I need the supplies, but it's not forthcoming. And no country wants to end up in that position. So it's understandable that countries are concerned, governments are concerned, and responding to this concern. But I think we should have a care about abandoning the concept of economic integration, because integration cannot guarantee peace, but I think it certainly gives us a better chance for peace than a me-first approach. The more countries prioritize their own private national interest and allow the common global or shared interest to go down the drain, the more we will all be worse off. That lesson is so clear from history. So let's not repeat the mistakes of history.
I think that's it's a very important reminder. Coming back to the tariffs and trade, what has your dialogue with the U.S. administration been so far? What is Singapore faced with?
Oh, we got 10% tariffs.
That is relatively good deal, though, isn't it?
Oh.
I heard about 140%, but I think that's now 50, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the facts, we have an FTA with America. America has a surplus with us. So on the basis of the FTA and the fact on the trade balance, we should have a 0 tariff, not a 10% tariff. But I think America has decided that 10% is their baseline tariff, and they are probably not going to go below 10%. So we have been engaging the officials, but that I think is their sort of mindset at this stage. But I know that other ASEAN countries have higher tariffs than us, and they have been also engaging their American counterparts. And we hope in time to come, when America makes a decision on the reciprocal tariffs, that it will be able to bring them down, at least closer to 10%, if not 10%. If indeed 10% is going to be the baseline applied to all countries.
And I think it's also important to remind ourselves that, you know, we're getting used to 10%, but this
is still very high.
It's 3 times higher than it used to be on average from the US. So it's already quite substantial.
Yeah, that's why I've said that we are in a new era where there will be more barriers to trade. And we have to accept these realities. Not that we think it's a good idea, but these are the realities that we have to work with. And in the meanwhile, countries that would like to promote and advance the agenda for free trade should come together and work in different formats, different platforms, whether regional or plurilateral platforms, to advance the agenda for free trade. And Singapore will be the first to lead the charge on this.
You know, Singapore has always been at the forefront also when it comes to technology. Just go to the port of Singapore and it is just mind-boggling what you're faced with. With Gen AI, with the robotics, with the synthetic biology, with also now satellites, but also space. There is so much happening. Some people say it's the second industrial revolution. This is as big as the industrial revolution. You can see increase in productivity with 10% in the coming decade if you apply Gen AI in the right way. Could you, when we're getting now at the end of this dialogue, say something about how do you assess the magnitude and the paradigm shift we're faced with in these technologies, and how do you position your own country to be at the forefront?
We think it's a major game changer. AI will be a major game changer. We, like all countries, would like to harness the benefits of technologies and AI to push the frontiers of our economy, raise productivity, and improve the lives of our people. But I would say that our focus is not just on what happens at the leading edge. There is a lot of media attention on where are the breakthroughs, which are the next unicorns, which are the next big, when will we get AGI, to materialize? All these are important conversations, no doubt.
Or a DeepSeek in Singapore.
Maybe, but we would like to harness AI in a different way, which is to make sure that the benefits are broad-based. Get every Singaporean, every company to really make full use of technology to improve and uplift themselves. And I'll give a simple example. When we embarked on our computerization drive in the 1980s, we had very few computers. My family, we weren't rich enough to have a computer, but the government made computers easily accessible to every Singaporean in community centers so we could learn, get used to it. In school, we had a computer club. It was very popular. Many of us would go there to play computer games, no doubt. But along the way, we learned and we got familiar. And it's not just at the top end. Everyone became familiar with computers very quickly. And we could harness computers and new technologies to improve our lives, to be more productive, and to transform society. In the same way with AI, let's not get too obsessed with what's happening at the cutting edge. But how can I, as a government, harness AI effectively to transform my processes in government? How can businesses, big and small, even the small, medium enterprises, make full use of AI to improve their processes, to become more productive? And importantly, how can I get every worker to master AI tools and be familiar with AI tools to be more productive? That's what we are obsessed about.
I think that's a great aspiration. It's also about wealth trickling down,
yes,
and everyone benefiting from it. And I think that when I followed the election, also in Singapore, I think at least my interpretation is one of the reasons why you did so well is we were addressing also practical challenges for the people in Singapore.
It has to be. It has to be. I mean, the
housing prices and all this.
A nation's progress has to be shared, felt, and experienced, and translated into improvements in the lives of people day by day. If it does not, there will be a disconnect, and the compact gets undermined, and societies don't hold together. And we don't want that to happen in Singapore.
And you saw the primaries in New York, maybe, this morning?
I've not been keeping track.
No, but I think we should look it up. But that shows also that if things are not addressed, it can lead to also frustrations. But Prime Minister, so good to have you here.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the discussion and also learning from your thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Great to see you, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
And we're so privileged to have the newly re-elected Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, with us of Singapore. This is Prime Minister's first visit also to China. And
as Prime Minister.
Yeah, as Prime Minister.
I'm no stranger to China.
No.
I've come to China almost every year.
And you speak the language, huh?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And I think Singapore is also the largest investor in China
yes,
still.
Yes, we are.
And
for 12 consecutive years.
Yeah. And I think you were also in Beijing and meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Yeah. That went well?
It went very well.
Yeah. And the mood was good? The mood was good?
Well, we have a close partnership, very broad and substantial, a very unique partnership. We call it an all-round, high-quality, future-oriented partnership.
Wow. That sounds very substantial.
It sounds better in Mandarin.
Does it? A lot of things sounds better in Mandarin. Also when you say slow is fast, you know, or a crisis, I think, has a double meaning.
Yes, 危机.
Yeah. So maybe, Prime Minister, I know that you have a few initial thoughts, and then we'll have a dialogue for half an hour.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Birgit, for the introduction. I think we are meeting at a time of profound changes in the world. After the end of the Cold War, the world saw an unprecedented period of global integration, characterized by open markets, rapid trade, free trade, rapid movement of capital, goods, ideas, and people across borders. And this brought benefits to many people, and for a long time this vision held true. Davos embodied this vision. A vision that global integration would deliver peace and shared prosperity. Unfortunately, I think the world is changing, and we see over the years more pressures. Discontent against globalization has risen. It started way back. I remember in 1999 when the WTO was held in Seattle, you already had demonstrations and protests there. But since then, year after year, you see in advanced economies, cities being destroyed because factories are closed, livelihoods get disrupted, jobs are displaced, and in more recent years, because of COVID and the concerns over supply security, Because of conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, now concerns about security have risen, and we are in a very different position today. The global norms, global rules are weakening, global institutions are weakening, and economic nationalism is replacing win-win cooperation. For small countries like Singapore, we are worried because we have limited options, we have limited bargaining power, and we risk being marginalized. But even bigger countries, I think, will have challenges dealing and operating in such a new environment because it will be harder for everyone to deal with common threats, be it pandemics, climate change, or financial shocks. So I think our response has to be collectively to try and still harness forces that will bring people together, promote integration, bring down barriers, and strengthen multilateralism. Multilateralism that is more resilient, more inclusive, and better suited to the realities of our time. So Singapore will do our part in this endeavor, whether it's forging partnerships, updating global rules, or advancing dialogue, working together with partners like the WEF. The efforts may seem small and incremental, but if like-minded countries everywhere were to do our part, then collectively I think we can make a difference. And then step by step, hopefully we can lay the groundwork for a new and more stable global order in time to come.
Thank you. I think Prime Minister deserves an applause for that. Picking up on your last point, what kind of order or more stable system could we foresee in the future? I think we had one world order after the Cold War, and that order is not really there anymore, but we don't know what is coming. The Premier lead this morning said we had to avoid the law of the jungle, or the jungle growing back. But how do you see this new system of cooperation? You could see a more multipolar system, but at the same time you see soft power replaced with strong power. You see interest spheres also being developed. So multipolarity is one thing, but aren't we seeing more a system of interest sphere? And that for smaller, medium-sized countries would be quite a challenge.
It is going to be a challenge. I think, frankly, no one knows what this new order will look like. It's still very early days. We are in a period of transition and a period of evolution. There will be critics of today's system that say it's good that now the system is changing. But I would also say let's have a care. Let's not be too quick to cheer, because what is the alternative? So we have to think through very carefully how we can evolve a better system. And I'll give you two examples of global institutions that have come under pressure, but over the years have been able to reform and upgrade themselves. First, the IMF. I started work as a young economist in the 90s, so I still remember vividly the 1997 Asian financial crisis. People till today call it the IMF crisis. Because the IMF came in with strict austerity, one-size-fits-all measures, and there was a reaction. But look, over the years, the IMF has reformed, it's updated itself, it's customized its approaches, become more responsive, more transparent, and it has taken into account local circumstances and context. It's an improved, upgraded IMF. To be clear, there's still reforms to be done. For example, and in particular, where it comes to the shareholding and governance structure, which still reflects a world after World War II and needs to be adjusted to better reflect the realities of today's economy. But that's one work that needs to be done and can be done in order for the IMF to maintain its credibility and legitimacy. Second, the WTO. It has brought about free trade, a rules-based trading system which has benefited many countries, but there is a feeling that the system is not working as well. And indeed, some of the WTO rules have lagged behind the realities of today's economy. particularly in digital trade. So what do we do? And again, the response is not to jettison the rules, but to think about how it can be improved. And a few countries, like-minded countries, Singapore working with Japan and Australia, we have come together to initiate a joint initiative on e-commerce. And after 5 hard years of negotiation, today more than 70 countries have agreed on the first set of rules for digital trading. It's the building block for the first set of global rules on digital trade. And I give these illustrations to show that it is possible to update, evolve, improve the multilateral system and global institutions that we have today. It is painstaking work, but there is no alternative. A new system does not just appear by magic. You have to work at it. And with creative, pragmatic solutions, bringing along like-minded countries, if we are able to start some of this work, do the building blocks one by one, then in time to come, others that are more ready can join in. So this is what we would call a flexible multilateralism. It's not about ad hoc array of different rules, but starting first, laying the building blocks, and eventually others can join in, and we can steer progress in the right direction.
It's very interesting, this notion of flexible multilateralism, because congratulations on getting an agreement around, I think, what they call these plurilaterals on this e-commerce. It means that countries that have common interests come together, and now we have more than 70 of them, and forming like trade rules in e-commerce.
That's right.
And later on, it can be more and more people, more and more countries contributing or being part of it, and then it could even turn into something that is multilateral.
Yes.
But with all these kind of more plurilaterals and also bilateral trade agreements,
they get too complicated,
and regional ones and all that, don't we end up with a big spaghetti bowl then?
Yes, there is that concern. But again, I ask, what is the alternative? Do nothing? It cannot be do nothing and hope that someday along the way something new emerges out of nowhere. I think we have to start from somewhere. And if we start with like-minded countries, putting in place some basic building blocks, but always with a view that whatever we do, it is open, it's inclusive. Others may not be ready to join, but in time to come they can join, and we can multilateralize these efforts.
Exactly. Have also Singapore changed its approach? I think traditionally you were doing more trade agreements under multilateral agreements like WTO, but have you now embarked on bilateral trade agreements, mega regional ones? Are you know, some countries are really getting a lot of agreements there. I think number one is Chile with like 100 of them.
Well, we did start with many bilateral FTAs too.
Yeah.
And then over time, these FTAs became the building blocks for a more robust multilateral system. Yeah. Today, when we look at the situation and some of the rising barriers to trade, again, our response would be to still work at reforming and updating the WTO, but in parallel, we are engaging with like-minded countries to find ways in which we can strengthen our trade and investment links. And we start with the countries nearest to us. Yeah. Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, we have a special economic zone now with Johor in Malaysia. We are working with Indonesia, where there's a free trade zone in the Riau Islands just next to us. So we have very close links with our closest neighbors. But even within Southeast Asia, we have a very close link with Vietnam. The Prime Minister of Vietnam is here. We have a connectivity agreement. We are doing something like more than 20 industrial parks in Vietnam. And then for the whole of ASEAN, we are looking at ways to better integrate ASEAN and make us more united, be able to offer a more competitive single market to investors. So that's within ASEAN. But outside of our region, we are also engaging different blocs. We already have very close links with China, Japan, Korea, India in Asia. But we are engaging outside of Asia, for example, with the EU, with the GCC, with Latin America. So we are trying to find ways to strengthen links with like-minded entities everywhere around the world.
If you look at global economy, we've seen that the growth this year was expected 3.2. Then it was revised to 2.8,
yes.
now to 2.5. Some have revised it down even to 2.3.
Yeah.
And WTO said the other day that on goods, they even expect maybe a contraction
yes.
of 1.5%. So trade used to be the driver of growth. I guess we need to find a different driver of growth moving forward. Could that be the new technologies? Could it replace trade? And how fundamental is the changing also on the trading landscape and the economic landscape? How do we avoid a sluggish growth for a decade to come like in the 70s?
I think trade will still exist. There is a move towards security, resilience, greater self-sufficiency, but frankly, no one can be completely self-sufficient. Trade will still be around. Maybe it will not grow as much as it used to, but I believe there will still be trade, but the patterns of trade will change and evolve. Different supply chains, different configurations, and for Singapore, we just want to remain competitive and relevant and stay at the center of these evolving trade links. So trade remains relevant, but changing patterns. Technology will be a new driver, I'm quite sure of that. I think the move towards sustainability will also be another driver. We all want to decarbonize, we want to get to net zero, we will need to harness new sources of clean and renewable power. We need to decarbonize industries. So both technology, new technologies, especially digital technologies and sustainability will, I think, will power the economy of the future.
It's interesting too, we heard it this morning too, that digital trade is growing 8%,
yes.
while seeing trade in goods, manufactured goods, is almost peaking. We also see services are growing much faster.
Yeah.
I guess this is relatively good news for Singapore though, because you're strong in services and you're strong on the digital and technology side.
We want to be strong in everything. But yes, we have some strengths. We have some strengths in financial services, logistics. We have some strengths in digital technologies, and we will continue to harness these strengths to stay competitive and relevant. Life is always difficult for a small country. History has never been kind to small nations. So we have to work extra hard compared to bigger countries to keep relevant and stay alive.
But the 60 last years have not been that bad for Singapore, though. It's a miracle, isn't it?
It's not. We think it's nothing short of a miracle, and so my mission is to keep this miracle going for as long as I can.
And it seems like the voters in Singapore approved by your policies. I think you increased your party's result with 6 percentage points.
I'm very grateful for their mandate.
Yeah, yeah. And not all incumbent parties can say that, at least not in Europe.
I can't speak about politics in Europe. I only care about, well, I can only manage the politics in my country. Which is enough for me.
And managing politics in Singapore means that you also have to deal with the big players, because you're such an open economy. As I said at the beginning, through Singapore, you are the largest FDI, foreign direct investor, in China,
yes.
But I guess in many ASEAN countries too. And now you have to maneuver between your special friends in the US and in China. How do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, that's the favorite question that gets asked of Singapore in conferences like this. I'm surprised it took you a while to get to the question.
I wanted to warm you up and hope for a different answer, you know?
Well, the simple response is we have good relations with both. We have broad and substantial relations with both America and China. And I know everyone monitors and tracks what we say and what we do very closely, trying to parse every hidden meaning behind every word, behind every action, whether we are moving closer to one or the other. But that's not how we look at things. That's not the way we approach it.
And because currently we are in China too, so.
Yeah, I know. And maybe tomorrow when I'm in America, then they think differently. But our starting point is that we look at things from Singapore's point of view in advancing Singapore's national interest. Our interests are to have close, good relations on substance with both America and China. And we will continue to do whatever we need to do to promote and advance Singapore's interest. It's not about balancing between the two superpowers, but it's about being consistent and principled in advancing and promoting Singapore's interests. And that's what we will continue to do. And I think if we continue to do so in a consistent and principled manner, our partners, whether it's America or China or other countries, will see us more as a reliable and trusted partner that we can work with. I would say also that Singapore's position is not unique. We want to be friends with both